Well, just to welcome everybody to Veterans in Conversation. Um, just to say that Scott can't make it today and should be back in about a month or two. So welcome everybody today, and also a pleasure to have James Espinoza with us. The goal of these conversations is really not so much about dwelling on the past, but looking in terms of how the past presents us with wisdom, growth, challenges, insight, anything positive, anything that can create wisdom, even if it's through struggles, and how those support us and challenge us to progress forward as we transition into civilian life. My experience in terms of coming out the Rhodesian Bush War in the mid-70s is that when there's no map and there's no compass, it's extremely difficult to transition and identify the layers of territory that face us, that we have to deal with. And as long as our compasses are not aligned and our map is really quite in deficit, it's extremely difficult to regather ourselves, refine ourselves, and form ourselves in a way that has meaning, but also that captures the wisdom from service and the past and the experiences that we have, excuse me, that we have along the way. So, James, I'm just going to read a little bit about you. James is a 6-year US Army veteran, recently retired, 20-year law enforcement leader, public speaker, and current mentor and coach for transitioning veterans and survivors of suicide loss. James's passion to support veterans and first responders is a positive response from the aftermath of the tragic death of his Army veteran brother to death by suicide in 2018. The program that James has developed is his passion, and empathy guides his decisions when working with his staff and leading the mentor program. When he transitioned from the military in 1999, he also completed a number of degrees, both in 1999 and 2003, respectively, and continues to serve his community and co-founded the Veteran Mentor Project with his wife, Liv, in January 2021. And James, really looking forward to hearing about that program as well. In addition to his military service, James has 5 years experience in the private sector and is a law enforcement professional. He has been recognized for his work in suicide prevention advocacy by the Ventura Country Crisis Team and a number of other organizations. James's words of encouragement for transitioning veterans and first responders are to advocate for yourself, be diligent in your research, and be willing to do the work necessary to have a successful transition. Additionally, James says, don't be afraid to try new things, follow your interests as well as your skills, but most importantly, do not be afraid to fail. The only failure is not trying. Your success depends on one critical factor: to do the work. Transition from service never stops, and so become a lifelong learner. So, James, in the spirit of that and the spirit of trying and doing the work and gaining the wisdom on the way, I'm going to hand over to you to begin your story and share your wisdom with us, brother.
Right, I appreciate it, Barry. You and I have talked about this to great depth. I think a couple weeks ago we talked about this a lot, and
Yeah.
um, Marika, I don't think you know my full story, so I'll be a little more detailed than I planned, but not overly detailed because again, I don't want to dwell on the past. And the fact remains that the incident that really was a catalyst for me to completely change directions in my life was very traumatic for me. So I can't promise that I won't cry on this little talk here, but I'll do my best to keep it together. I've done a lot of deep work to work through this to get to the point where I can even talk about this anymore. First and foremost, I wouldn't have been able to do this without the support of my wife and my family. I have a very strong, my mom is still alive, and I lost my dad 5 years before losing my brother. So that's kind of my part of this story as well. And I've really just kind of done a lot of research on a lot of different things. So I was about 40, let's see, I got some notes here. Late, I was in my mid 40s, so I was about 44 years old. My older brother, who was 48 at the time, he took his own life by suicide. He was a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. So, as that terminology goes, you're probably already aware, but that's a high level manager of personnel. And when he got out of the service, he found himself struggling with his transition. I think when you think of a West Point graduate and someone who has those types of credentials, including a master's degree in decades of work behind them that you think that they could come out and pretty easily find a job, and that just wasn't the case. So I kind of watched this downward spiral of him, and I've used what I've observed in him to develop a program that I call the VETS Mentoring Program, the Veteran Education and Training for Success, which we'll get into a little bit later. But really, what the foundation of the program that I've started is based on 5 pillars of wellness. And there's all kinds of different programs. SAMHSA has 8 pillars. Some programs have 6, some have less. But I created a 5-pillar program that are based on mental wellness, physical wellness, financial wellness, relationship wellness, and career wellness. And we're mostly a career mentoring company. So if you think of people in transition from service, we want to kind of grab them, scoop them up on the way out, and be that sounding board for them to be able to bounce ideas off of, work through resume issues, job interviews, things like that. In a perfect world, we'd have hundreds and thousands of people calling us every month and every week, but that's just not the case. I've found in this space, I lost my brother, um, and his story is a big part of my story. And I use the Bible verse of Hebrews 13:1 that is, let brotherly love continue, kind of drive me forward to continue to help people. So I found that this space of wellness and helping veterans and first responders in transition from service is high interest but low demand. And I say that because all of us recognize that there is an issue with people transitioning from service. Those of us that have done the homework and done deep work understand that our brains are truly rewired from pre-service to now. We're Our stress responses are much deeper, um, sometimes more volatile. It's hard to get those emotions under control, which is some of the things that I experienced throughout my 26 years of service. Just the slow degradation of my performance and my attitude and just all kinds of things that happen, um, that I can look back on now that I've been retired for a little over a year. I can look at that and go, wow, I was really stuck in a high op tempo and I was really intolerable to changes and stressors around me. And I can use that now also in my program to say, look, I've been through this. I've been through military transition into military service. I went through military back to civilian life, then into law enforcement, which is a paramilitary organization that came with a lot more stressors that I didn't have from even the military experience. But my brain had already been switched and rewired for military service. So kind of staying on track here. Um, General George Patton said, it's foolish and wrong to mourn the people, the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men existed, or is that such men lived. And I can't say that I've always felt that way about my brother's death by suicide. I've been in rooms with Gold Star families that have a sense of pride or honor that their loved one was lost during combat, right? Like to have been taken out by the enemy. And this is from a perspective of a soldier and someone who's seen a lot of violent crime. There's a perspective from my point of view to say that my brother died by suicide. I know and believe that it definitely is directly attributed to his service, but it's still not the same as an enemy combatant taking him out. And in a way, with my beliefs, the devil took him out. The enemy, in that regard, took him out. Like he lost the battle to his own mind. And I've taken that experience and used it to really learn about myself. And to the extent that I made a conscious choice to stop or reduce alcohol consumption, I very much limit um, my willingness to take any psychotropic meds that the VA may want to give me or a doctor may want to give me. And I've really looked for homeopathic ways and just holistic ways to heal and move forward. So what I did is I created kind of a 5-point system in terms of understanding how to move forward and really how to launch from grief. I don't want to give any spoilers to my current presentation, but through the steps that I took, I found a meaningful way forward. Some of the basics that are very much common and the very basis of what I've seen um, the power of our story contribute to is that my brother's tragedy in terms of his loss of life and to watch his downward spiral just again I was probably in tune to it when it was happening, but I didn't know how to articulate and extract from him what was going on. So I had to replay all of it backwards in time from the time that I lost him. Really, well, there was a time of really deep grief where I couldn't process anything. Like I was so literally just devastated that my older brother took his own life that it took me good, 6 months to a year to even recognize that I was so deep into my own grief and so concerned with like trying to control that else in my family would kill themselves or do something like that, that it took me this I want to say 6 months to a year to kind of come back out and resurface to the world and say, okay, there's something else here that I need to start working on. And I looked at that and I really took a hard look and started to reprioritize my life. I was a guy that was at the time, I think I was 17 or 18 years into my law enforcement career, maybe a little less. Um, and I was planning on going and working for 25 years in law enforcement. So I would technically still be working in law enforcement had this not occurred. So I recognized that I had given and donated and volunteered and worked overtime so many thousands of hours that I wanted to get some of my own life back. And I recognized that I needed to find a way to do that. And I recognized that there's this need that, as I was saying, the power of our story for tribe. There's this need to have a tribe that you connect to, that I can connect to. I need to have that connectedness with other groups of people in similar workspaces that understood who I am. And not only as a veteran, because I'm technically not a combat veteran. I lived in a war zone for 2 years with my wife in Korea. We had the whole mentality of the North Koreans want to come get you, they want to come kill you, be ready for war. I lived with that for 2 years, so I do have that mindset switch of that mentality for the threat of war hanging over my head. But I wasn't the guy that went to Afghanistan and Iraq and Somalia and all these things. I missed all that stuff largely. My trauma came in through law enforcement and through the subtle brain changes that happen through military service. And I had to kind of figure out how do I connect back into these spaces without 100% living in that space anymore because there's a reason why I got out of the military. I didn't want to be in that space anymore. There's a reason why I wanted to retire from law enforcement. I didn't want to be in that space anymore, right? It's very type A personality, very aggressive, very responsive, like you're very reactive to the needs of the community and the goings on in the media, how much that just drives how society looked at us. I had a completely new set of stressors that I had to figure out after my brother died because my first and largest goal was that I wasn't going to end up in a box like he did for the reason that he did. I recognized that his death by suicide made me 50% more likely to commit suicide or to take my own life, right? So that awareness, and I know commit suicide is not the politically correct way to say it, but that I wouldn't do that one day became like my biggest fear. And I had to step back and say, what do I know about this now? What did I think I knew about it? And what do I need to learn about it so that I don't end up doing that one day too, right? I don't think that will be my outcome. I've never been really in that dark space that others have found themselves to want to end their lives. I just always, no matter how stressful the job got, or no matter how depressed I may have felt, I didn't really consider that as an option. But now that my brother had done that, it really put a lot of fear into me just to try to figure out how to navigate it. And that was very difficult. So through the tribe, the connectedness, connecting with Power of Our Story and other groups out there, I really just learned how to reframe it. Um, I really want people to understand that my brother's death by suicide was by far the probably the most excruciatingly painful experience I've ever been through in my life, and I don't know many circumstances that could be worse until I experience it at this stage of my life. I've seen countless amount of death and suicide as being a homicide investigator and a gang detective and a street cop and all that. I've seen all that stuff firsthand. I was even a deputy coroner for a while, so the aspect of death that impacted me so personally was now I wasn't the guy going to tell other people that their family member had died. I was the guy experiencing all of that. And I had teenagers at the time, so they were like still developing brains. My youngest was, I mean, their brains were still developing, I should say. My youngest was, I think, 12 when my brother died. But I'm going to back up just a little bit in time. 4 years and 10 months before my brother died by suicide, we lost my dad to a very rapid cancer. So I was there for that experience to close my dad's casket, and then within 5 years, closing my only brother's casket. And I didn't quite know how to get through it. Like, I didn't know, nobody in my family had ever died by suicide that I knew about at the time. I learned some things afterwards, I had learned that some extended family members had taken their own lives. But I just there was no roadmap for me. So in essence, what you see, and if you see this book, if you end up getting it, I'm not here to pitch it in any way, because the thing is, it's not a self-help book from the standpoint that you buy it and you work through it and it helps you find another job. This is really a guideline for me to take and say, look, this is the program I've developed, and this is how you mentor someone successfully. I've been a crisis intervention team trainer. I've been a SWAT crisis negotiator. I've been a supervisor of dozens and dozens of people. I've dealt with thousands of people in crisis, probably in the streets. So I'm able to take all of that experience and kind of come back down to one simple rule. And really, it's two words for me. In all the crisis moments that I've ever been in, whether it's my personal family or people I don't know from Adam in the streets, those two words always helped in the end. And those two words are love wins. Love wins in the times that people are in their darkest moments and they want to end their lives. I've figured it out what people love to talk them down from bridges, to talk them into handcuffs, to get them to kind of come back from that dark crisis moment and wanting to die to finding a reason, if even for that moment, to live, right? It doesn't mean later somebody didn't end up taking their lives. That happened to me too. That happened to me on one occasion. We had a case of a retired police sergeant that I was assigned to find out if he was suicidal or not, and he told us all the right things and he said all the right things. We couldn't take him anywhere for mental help because he had all the answers, and he still ended up taking his own life. Another gentleman, we saved him from himself. 3 months later, he took his own life, right? So I get that these traumatic events will still happen, but through this process, what I develop for the program that I'm passing along to other people is that first, when you're trying to get through your grief, is that the very first thing you have to be able to do is to allow yourself to grieve. Whatever the experience is, if you fight the grief, it's going to prolong it. You got to go deep into that trough of grief and go in there and come back out, and you come out stronger. Then you have to commit to launching. You got to find something, find your purpose, find some reason that makes you get up every day. Even if it's a 180 degree turn, from whatever it is you're doing now, if the thing that's in the opposite direction is a thing that gets you up, follow that. Commit to launching from your grief by figuring out how to get to those next steps. Create a plan. So this is what I did. These are all the things that I've done to develop my program is create a plan, an outline of what you want to do. Do the research for the goals that you have for your launch. And then the very most important thing after allowing yourself to grieve, in my opinion, is to take action. You've got to take action off of the ideas that you had. Otherwise, they just remain ideas, right? So what I've taken here, and just as an example, the whole program that I designed exists so that we can prevent other families from experiencing what we experience. So I created an actual visual. I feel like it's show and tell here. Let's go. There's the visual. I don't have it on my screen. There it is. You can kind of see it. There it is. The 5 pillars of wellness. I created a visual for that we can take and use it as a demonstration of what these pillars might look like, right? So if you see those 5 pillars and one of them kind of crumbles, the roof's probably going to stay up, right? The second one, depending where it's at, the roof will probably still stay up. But if you start crumbling on a third pillar, now you're in real trouble, right? So it's not only a visual representation of what wellness might look like, it's the truth. Like if that third pillar falls, that roof is going to come crashing down. So we've got to work with you to shore it back up, to strengthen it. And I think for me that the part that is hardest for me is I still have those days where I just don't want to get up and I don't want to do anything. And I got to be extra kind to myself that even though I have found kind of a positive, more healthy way forward, I still have those days where I'm just not there. I just don't want to do it. And I got to give myself grace and say, you know what? Try again tomorrow, or just create a very specific task that I need to get done for whatever is on my mind, whatever the project is, insert the project. And I say, okay, I'm going to accomplish these 2 or 3 things today, and then I'm going to shut it down and come back, regroup tomorrow. I went from being a super hard charging, kind of no nonsense, know it all kind of guy that just was very confident what he was doing. Not from a know it all from a negative, but like in my brain, I had a lot of things that I thought I knew. And my brother's death just rocked my world. Like I had a whole foundation of just lies that I thought I built my whole life on, right? I followed this dude everywhere. Soccer field, track, bikes around the neighborhood, into the military. And here he was, he took himself out. I just couldn't process that. And I finally got to the point with, if you know Doc Springer, I think you all know Doc Springer, God bless her. She told me even recently when I shared this with her, and this is very useful, I think, to anybody who may be grieving, is that depending on the type of death that you might experience grief from, in my case, this is a suicide death. With my dad's death was cancer. It was hard to fathom his rapid decline in death, but he still was my dad. He was older, and this is part of the circle of life. You get to this rational point with I want to what I want to say with a regular death, right? Somebody who dies from illness, you find a way like, well, God, it was their time. They got sick, they died. With my brother, like here's a guy who motivated and inspired people, and if you talk to anybody who he ever worked with, like this was the guy that got most inspirational athlete on his state championship soccer team. He got MVP on his West Point prep school soccer team from a defensive position for scoring the most goals in the season. This guy was just, it just reminds me of the whole Robin Williams story, right? Like they want people so badly to experience the joys of life that in my opinion, my brother lost a huge part of himself. And I tell people this all the time, like I was the grouchy, angry brother, and he was the happy-go-lucky, like jokester, right? So we were truly yin and yang, and I've had to carry some of his torch, which for me has been at times exhausting, but I got to the point where I recognized my job is not to carry his torch, it's just to share his story. And I don't want to keep on and keep on and keep on with this, but in the long run, for someone who may be experiencing grief, if you can take these steps and allow yourself to first grieve, second, you can commit to launching, insert whatever your plan is. Like, I'm going to commit to launching. There's an old warrior saying that says, I don't know how I'm going to win. I just know I'm not going to lose, right? Commit to launching. I'm going to find something that I'm going to get through this, and then create your plan. That's the third step. Part of the plan is doing research. That's the next step, but don't be afraid to take action. I think if you can implement those simple steps into whatever it is you're grieving, whatever the trauma is you want to overcome, and everybody's different, I recognize that, and I'm just going to conclude with this, is that even though everybody's different, for me to have to hit the issue head on and address it and create a plan and create a book and do public speaking, that's cathartic for me. If your thing is to watch and observe and do nothing, that's okay too. So I'm not in any way saying that you validate launching from grief by doing something. Everybody's different. Just find the thing. If doing nothing is your thing and you can be healthy that way, please do it. But if you want to run for president, or people become what is it, jiu-jitsu champions and weightlifting champions, in some ways it's a shift of energy from grief to a thing. I still think that staying stuck in grief is less healthy than finding that thing to be overly focused on, even for a short period of time. And I hope in my heart of hearts that somebody does watch this and they do take something from it. I recently wrote an article, and it was motivated and inspired by a cousin of mine who we talked about getting through grief. And I'm going to look up the article real quick. The nature of the article is about allowing yourself to grieve. Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. Here it is. No, there it is. Anyways, I lost my train of thought. So it's important that there it is, reach out and speak your truth. There it is. So the title of the article is reach out and speak your truth. So it's important that when you're grieving, depending on where you are in your spiritual walk, if you're a Christian or another religion, or you like yoga, it's just really understanding that there's a higher being, a higher power out there that can help us heal. Reaching out has to do with reaching out not only to someone, but reaching out to that right someone, right? You can talk to the wrong person and it can actually maybe re-traumatize you or not be a good solution for you. So know that you're going to reach out to someone who is the right person to talk to. And then learn to speak your truth. So speaking your truth has to do with, if someone asks you if you're okay and you're not okay, and you just say, I'm fine, are you speaking your truth, or are you prolonging your problem? Maybe the person at the grocery store line is not the person that you tell, I'm really struggling because I lost my brother to suicide, but it's still finding the right person that's in your circle of trust, or even the right therapist to reach out to. So I shared the article that I wrote. Oh, you just shared it there. You found it. That's kind of it in a nutshell. This was kind of, to me, I wanted to be organic with how I presented this today, because I've done the structured speeches. I do have set models of speeches that I do give that would be a companion to this workbook as well. but I really wanted to leave some time to kind of talk, and maybe if you had specific questions that are in this realm, I'll be happy to answer. So,
James, I'll jump in quickly, then we'll throw it open. I just want to say what I really love about you, brother, is that in conversation with you, I always feel my heart. I feel it so deeply as you dig into your grief.
yeah,
And it's interesting because I often say it's like when I tear away everything, the story of my life and my journey, at the bottom of it all, at the end of a day, at the end of a long night is grief. You know, and it's many things: loss of self, loss of identity, loss of mates, loss of family members, loss of purpose, loss of belonging. Grief is the
yeah,
thing that interweaves so deeply within us. And I find that, when you talked about having to create the mission and the purpose, and we can dig in a bit into that, but that grief is something that whispers to us. It whispers to me. And there are times I've thought I've had my pillars really well structured, I've got everything in place, but then singing between those pillars is the song of grief. And it's the grief of many things in the past and even things that happened just several years ago when I thought, made some peace. And grief is probably the one thing that I know I personally struggle with because it is such a painful experience. It can feel consuming. And I sat with grief once, and I love acronyms. And what came to me with grief was the message in grief at the end of a long night of feeling into the depths of our heart is the grief is G would be the gratitude we have for ourselves and others. And I think grief has that capacity. There's a song in grief. It's a song of deep sadness. It's a song of deep pain, but it also offers us a wisdom that guides us into the journey of our life. And gratitude was one of them. The other one was respect for self and other. Because in the losses we experience, it truly makes us grateful for the moments we have with those around us and including ourselves. Then the I was the level of integrity and insight that grief provides, because grief is something that draws us so deeply inside. And I feel sometimes even personally, and you resonated with me when you said how you resisted that. And I know even at this stage of my life, I can feel grief and I can resist it because it's just like, God, give me a break. I just want to be light. Yeah,
yeah,
and it'll come out where sometimes Chris and I are watching a movie and she'll look at me and she'll see that I'm feeling it and she'll go, "How are you?" And I do what you just said, which is I'm fine.
yeah.
And the other part of my brain goes, "Really?" And so I know that is a huge challenge with grief. And all the men I've sat with over so many years feel the same thing. It's this universal force, this creative, painful, sometimes awful force that lives in the middle of us. And then
Yeah.
the E was for empathy. That grief, the gift of grief, is that, and you can add G as it's grateful and it's a gift as well. But the gift of it is that informs empathy because I think there's something about grief that keeps our hearts alive and moist. As much as we may hate it and I try to run away from grief. And probably in some ways I still do, and probably in some ways I'm getting more comfortable with it. But I've spent a long life trying to make my peace with it. Not even make my peace is not, it's to walk with it would be a better thing, to see it as fertile ground. And so that empathy for other, and finally, F is what you touch ground, which is faith. Because faith gives us something that is beyond us, within us, and helps us gain some, not some distance, but it gives us a perspective on seeing it with meaning. I'm just wondering, in the moments of your struggle with the grief that lies in your heart, what kept you going? How did you walk through that place instead of freeze in that place? Or when you did freeze, how did you open to it?
It's a really good question. So I became the patriarch of my family at the age of 44, I think. My dad died. No, I was 39 when my dad died. Yeah, my brother died at 44. So although we don't live really in a patriarchal society as maybe we grew up in, we still had kind of that hierarchy in my family. And at some point, even though I had an older brother, I became more of the patriarch because I was here and present to help my dad with his illness. And not only did I was a detective at a local police agency at the time. I also was running my dad's business when he got sick, and then I was also being a dad and a husband at the same time. So I was spread so thin. When I was coming out of the cloud of grief from my dad's death and then immediately flipped onto my head with my brother's suicide, the thing that kept me going, to answer your question directly, is I didn't want to die by suicide.
Yeah, I hear you.
I didn't want to end up. This was it's hard for me to articulate. I felt like my brother quit on us, and I wasn't going to quit on my family. So no matter how hard it got, excuse me, um, no matter how hard it got for me, and it got hard, it got really hard. Um, I immersed myself in leadership and research and finding healthy pathways. So my commitment to launching was exactly based on that that warrior ethos of I don't know how I'm going to win. I just know I'm not going to lose. I just really entrenched myself in the idea that I wasn't going to lose. And through that journey, I went to I went through grief counseling, intense grief counseling once a week for that first year after my brother's suicide, to the point where myself and the therapist were just looking at each other and she goes, "Well, do you think you still need to come here?" I'm like, "I guess not, okay." Because we were no longer talking about those things, but it became comfortable for me to go. I ended up going to the Save a Warrior program. Um, and that was a huge reset for me. If you're not familiar with it, they're based in Ohio now. It's a Save a Warrior program, and they were based on the old Spartan principles of welcoming warriors home. From that standpoint, to go through that experience and start to really understand the physiological and psychological changes I went through as a warrior, that really put me on track to where we are today, to where I can even sit here and talk about this, because part of me wants to disappear into obscurity. The other part of me cannot shut up because my brother shouldn't have died by suicide. And there's thousands and thousands of veterans and first responders dying because of suicide. Whether we like it or not, I'm going to use the term we because I am both of them, a veteran and a retired first responder. We drink ourselves to death. We stress ourselves to death. We shoot ourselves to death. We take drugs ourselves to death. There's so many things that we try to do to keep our physiological balance in order that our psychological balance suffers. And when I talk about doing the work, it's exactly that, being willing to take yourself into a trench to fight your demons and come out healthier. If someone's not willing to do that, they're going to struggle for the rest of their life. And I can honestly say that I'm in a better place today than I was 5 years ago when this started. And then 5 years before when that started, with my dad's death was a big trigger for all of it. But like I said, I was able to rationalize my dad's death. Then I went back into irrationality with my brother's suicide. It was very hard, but that commitment to not wanting to die, that commitment to not wanting to die by suicide myself is what got me it is what got me through, because it just wasn't an
Yeah,
option for me.
James, I mean, what you said again, I felt your grief and I felt your sadness. And as I was sitting with that, I had this image and this feeling of grief as a river that flows through our souls and our hearts. And I know that drug ourselves to death, do us whatever we do. I mean, I try to run myself to death, but I couldn't never run far
Yeah.
enough
Yeah,
to actually run ahead of my grief. It was always there by my side. I
that
can
is a
distract
great point.
myself and it's always there. And I wonder whether when we try to dam up grief, so like we process it and we no longer struggle with grief. And I don't know if that's realistic. And Ulrike, I'd love to hear the thoughts you do have. But I don't know if that's realistic. I think grief is a song that welcomes us into being such better human beings. And the sadness of everything, whether we've lost slivers of ourselves or people or situations in which, we've stared at darkness in a unit alone and wondering whether we choose to live or die. But grief has the power to rescue us as well. It's this interesting thing with grief that I'm still trying to struggle at times to get my teeth around. But I know it's not something that should be locked in a box, and I know it shouldn't be ever envisioned as we do our grief work. And I've spent, 6 years doing my grief work, and now I'm fine. Well, I see it in you and I see it in me that the tears always live. They live in our hearts, and there are moments when it comes out. And what a gift, because I think in our tears we remember. And in our tears is the continuity of healing. So, I mean, Ulrika, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I don't know if you want to take a few minutes and talk about what you do, um, or what you're comfortable with, but I'd love to hear how you want to jump in and what you'd like to share, if that's okay with you.
I think I would just like to ask a couple of questions, just as
Go
a
for it, please. Yeah.
heart open person. James, first of all, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for. I'm not sure if people are like listening. I imagine they can hear the moment when there's a little bit of shaking in your voice, and they can feel the emotion coming through, and it gives me a little bit more comfortability to ask you because I can see, wow, you're opening up and I'm allowed to ask you something. That's
Sure.
how it
Yeah.
feels. Um, First of all, can I ask your brother's name?
Yeah, his name was Ponce. Ponce, Ponce, like Ponce de Leon. But
Wow. Okay, I've never heard that name.
yeah, so just a quick backstory on that, and I'll leave it at that, is when he was little, so I was the husky little brother, right? I've always been bigger than him, but he was real slender and skinny, but he had a pot-belly stomach. So in Spanish, panzón is stomach, right? So panzoncito was his nickname because he was a little skinny guy, but he had a pot belly. So they called him panzoncito, and it became Ponce. So I knew him as Ponce. His legal name was Pedro Ramos Espinoza II.
Okay, okay. Um, so this is really nice for me, and this is what I come to also know. It's really nice to ask people. I had this conversation today to say, like, how comfortable are we in asking people that are going through something, that are going through grief. I've had the conversation today again of saying, like, every warrior would come running the moment their brother would speak up and say, I'm in need of help. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I'm close to, closing the lid.
Yeah,
Everybody would drop everything. The point is that most of you, as far as I understand, do not get to this place where you are allowing yourself to ask for that. So you suffer in silence, you are with yourself. And what I'm learning is that by culture, we kind of have a struggle to overcome in asking, into kind of prying into somebody's intimate space, right? Of like, somebody will invite me, will open up the moment they're ready to show themselves. And that's the part that I feel like I wish we would try out to ask more. I would love to have your point on that, to say, like, if someone says, man, I'm having a hard time, just taking this example, which is probably already worse than it sounds, right? I'm having a hard time. For a warrior to speak that out is probably already a big thing. So I have I have guys saying to me, well, and then, I'm offering in the sense of saying, well, if you ever need anything. But right? So which that kind of answer, you need the other person once again to take the next step, right? Which they probably are not able to. So
Correct.
the point is where I feel like when you said finding the right person, right? I would also say to practice to be the right person in the sense
Yes.
of how could you, if someone is struggling, how could you, in the opposite of what you've learned of, I don't want to pry, I don't want to overstep, I don't want to be too private, I don't want to, like, if just trust that they're gonna put their boundary up, you're rather gonna overstep a boundary than not having your brother with you anymore. So,
Right.
to kind of practice to say, okay, you're having a hard time, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, what does that
Yeah.
mean? So maybe you
Yeah.
want to like expand a little bit, because I know that asking these kind of questions, going into a question of, hey, what's going on? How can I help? Can you tell me what you feel like? How does that feel like? Or what are you doing with that when it feels like this? Can you explain
Yeah.
how that happens in your life, or how it did, or
Yeah.
people you know?
Yeah, I can tell you from experience, when I feel myself triggering now, I can articulate that I'm triggering, but I can't articulate what's bothering me. So I have to really sit in it and say what is triggering me right now, right? I have to say, like, I'll use with my wife, for example. My dad's death anniversary just passed on June 12th. And I was really super irritable for a couple days leading up to it. And I knew I was irritable, but I didn't really know why. I knew that my dad's 13th year death anniversary, or 12th anniversary of his death was coming up, but the two weren't connecting for me. I saw them as separate. And if someone would ask me if I would say, I'm having a difficult time, I wouldn't know what to say at that point. I don't, I part of it, I think, is just being male. You can argue it's innate, or you can argue it's learned. Either way, it's just how I am as a man. Is we've been taught for so long, like, don't cry, don't show your emotions, just suck it up and be strong. That when you're weak, when you're feeling vulnerable, people don't want to hear it. And there's a joke like, yeah, nobody cares, right? Just work harder. Nobody cares. Just work harder. And you hear that enough, and you get put in those environments enough. I'm just going to say, as a warrior, as a first responder, as a military person, we are taught to get through tough situations. What they fail to teach us is how to get through those tough psychological situations. I have a very high pain tolerance. I have a very high patience tolerance, but you set me off in the wrong setting, I will do terrible with the pain and I will have no patience. So under the right circumstances, I could be a real asshole, um, for lack of a better term. So I would say, to your point, being able to tell someone, I can listen, I'm here for you, goes a long way. You've got to be able to sit with someone in their darkness before they're going to trust you with what's on their mind. It's just the way it is. I can barely articulate to my family when something is really, truly bothering me, because my go-to place is anger, strength, overcome. I would rather be a strong, angry man and quiet than tell you what's my heart is crying over as we sit and speak, right? So it's just there is amount of trust that you have to build with someone. And I think that first step, I have to practice it too. That first step is saying, I can listen to you without giving you any fix-it advice is one of the hugest steps you can make for anyone. And then if you say that, you have to, before you give advice, you have to say, may I give you advice? You know, would you be willing to hear some advice from my perspective? And if the answer is no, you have to be prepared to zip it too, right? And it's hard. I've had people in really bad situations and had to filter out what the true stressors are. And I agree with you 100%. We have to be able to sit with someone and learn what it is that's hurting them before, if we're to be effective at all. Because I really do believe that most people don't care. If someone on the streets, if the cashier at the register says, "How are you doing today?" all they want to hear is, "I'm good." If you said, "Well, my dad just died, my brother killed himself, and I'm really having a hard time paying my bills," I don't think that's what the response they wanted to hear, right? So finding that right person is huge. And if you can be that person and you can learn to listen, um, that saves lives. I believe it does. Because that purging of those ideas and the hurts helps. I think there's another level to that though. And that's also knowing what are the proper resources to send someone onto if you're not equipped to help them. Even as a therapist or as a doctor or as a mentor, if I'm not equipped to help someone with something, I also need to be educated on the resources that I can send them to. I think that's the second part of that equation, because we can listen all day long, but if we don't have any resources that can truly help them, if I'm not the person that can help them, then we need to be we as the person, as the listener, we need to be prepared to reach out to our own network for potential solutions, if the person's willing to listen.
I would agree and disagree because I feel on one hand, maybe I can kind of invite a different wording when you said before, like, I can listen to you, right? I'm here, I can listen to you, which subconsciously already tells the other person once again that they're a burden, right? The other person is allowing me to giving me their space, which is hard, right? So I'm just kind of changing the words to I want to listen to you. I want to know what's going on. I feel like
Yeah,
that's a huge difference of intention and releases the other person of I'm here, I'm taking the time. I have all the time that we need. I'm gonna just sit
yeah,
here, right? And I feel like if we pressure ourselves to say I have to have the answer or I have to know what I'm gonna do with whatever is gonna show up, I would imagine that it will limit you to even try. I believe that very often just sitting there and being there, which for the most of us, being the cashier, I'm sure the cashier at the supermarket would probably also love to have moments where they are asked, hey, what is your day actually like, right? None of us is
right.
used to it on both sides, right? We're not used to being listened to and we're not used to asking for real, right? So I
Yeah,
think that would go a long way, I imagine.
yeah, yeah. I think it does. And again, I'm really new to this. I mean, 5 years of advocacy work, and really the last probably year to 18 months has been my most growth in this field. Keeping in mind that up until my brother's death by suicide, um, I thought I was pretty well educated in the wellness space. And after he died, I felt like I knew absolutely nothing. I completely went through an identity crisis because I had been working for 20 over 20 years at that point, because I also had the military time, um, to lead people to safety, for lack of a better term. Like no matter what the scenario was, a domestic violence incident, a person that wants to jump from a bridge, a stabbing victim, a shooting victim, uh, we're always trying to work people to safety. For years and years of my life, that was my role. And to have my only brother do this to me just pulled the rug and 10 feet of ground out from under me. I could not fathom what a fraud I was by missing all of that with my brother. And I came back around to rationalize it. And I don't know if I finished what I was saying about Doc Springer earlier. Is she framed it in a way to me that what if the brother that I thought I knew was the brother I thought I knew, but something broke that changed him? And until she said that to me, I felt like maybe he was broken the entire time. And that really helped have that demarcation for me to fix it in my brain to say, well, I did follow a good guy, you know. He just broke something, don't know what, something broke inside of him along the way, and whether it was his heart. My mom says he died of a broken heart, you know. I mean, I guess if someone takes their own life, that's kind of it, right? Their heart is broken. So I had to come full circle with that. And then that also forces me, like what you're saying, that also forces me to be aware of when I'm not being a good listener, when I need to say I want to listen because I want the best for you, right? I mean, I think you have to find that inspiration in there of why you would want to listen to somebody. And I think that's for me, outside of professional training, I don't share the same point of view that someone would think I'm a burden if they're giving me their time. I see it differently where I think, why would someone want to give me that time? So it's a weird like juxtaposition. Even though I'm willing to do it for someone else, I don't want to waste somebody else's time. And that goes back, I see it time and time again in our program. You want a mentor? Do you want to be part of our program? I can't even see the book. There you go. Do you want to have a mentor that 9 times out of 10, someone wants to mentor other people rather than have a mentor because they just want to be in that fixer space, right? And if you don't have that professional training to do what you're saying, I want to listen to what is happening and how I may help you, however the wording is. I just don't see that. We've really got to ingrain that into our culture. It's really, really missing in the culture that I came from law enforcement and from the military. I just don't. You've got me thinking now, like, how do we change that discussion for warriors? Is that it's got to be a top-down change. It has to stop. That has to start from the top at the chief level and come all the way back down for everyday officers to change how they approach their partners.
You know, I tell you what came up for me, James, is I remember many years ago, they wrote a book on my unit. And when I finished reading the book, I was so sore. I cannot describe it. And that was like that book was written maybe 35 years afterwards. And every part of my body, my nervous system, it's like even words felt too much. Somebody talking to me and asking me words felt too much. And
Yeah,
even with the recent loss I had, it's like, don't ask me, don't talk to me. I push back. But then the one thing was when somebody gets close and then and it's somebody I trust, and in the physical holding, my heart breaks. And I became aware that it wasn't even, I didn't want somebody to talk to me. I wanted to be held because the words themselves were triggering me. It was like my the endings of my nerves were so sensitive that the words were too loud. I could feel myself growling, or I'd shut down. I didn't want to talk. And I just wonder
yeah.
about that part where it's our bodies that are crying out to be held rather than our ears and our minds that are wanting to listen. I don't know. I
I,
just know the
I
reaction I
share
had.
that. I share that as well, and I think so. I was blessed with a really, really good childhood. Like I had very loving parents and all that. So it's tough. Like you can go, there's a whole psychological aspect to all of this, right? Like I was the youngest child in my family for 14 years until I had a younger sister come along. So from a very young age, I had a lot of attention, from affection from aunts and uncles to always just people around, right? So as you grow into adulthood and you become, like I said, I became the patriarch. So now I'm the person that's expected in a roundabout way to provide leadership, to provide income, to have my shit together and not fall apart, because now people are looking at me how I respond to this devastating life consequence or devastating life tragedy, right? Back to back with 4 years and 10 months is way too fast to lose a dad and a brother for anybody, but I know people lose whole families, so I always go to that perspective as well. But I just couldn't. I got to the point where my nervous system, as you described, would not settle down. Just I was constantly waiting for the next horrific thing to happen. And when it wouldn't happen, I was already on edge. So something little could happen that would set me off, right? And I'm going, what the hell why am I so upset right now? But again, I say this from an educational standpoint to be able to look backwards in time and go, wow, that was my nervous system. That wasn't like my, there wasn't really something wrong with me, so to speak, even though I'm thinking, what is wrong with me? It's my body reacting to fight or flight of life or death when the situation wasn't life or death. And that became really, really difficult to handle. But when I learned what it was, that was the biggest tool in my arsenal to now address it. Because I could say now, so as a problem solver, I call myself a systems guy. If you show me a system of something, how it's working, I'll find a way to make it more efficient. This is the same thing. Now with a title and an explanation of why this is happening, now it gave me something to address. And now I felt, for lack of a better term, less broken, less that like something was wrong with me, more like I had something I can work on now. And I think when I talk about the whole concept of love wins, it's finding that thing that someone can work on as a solution that they can start to really truly heal. Until they can articulate that, it's it's 100 times harder because they're not kind of working to resolve that problem. That's my opinion. That's from talking with hundreds and hundreds of veterans and first responders that are kind of similar in a lot of ways, even though our stressors are different. I just think that knowledge of what's actually going on in your body really helps give you something you can work on, right? You feel less like it's out of your control and more like I have an answer to why this is happening. That just is a big puzzle solver for me. And sorry to keep going on this, but when you start to educate other people on that too, they go, oh, no wonder why I felt that way. And that education process is huge, huge. And I think that's why in these circles, we relate so well because we've all been there in one way, shape, or form.
So what does it mean to have, we always talk about, I've got your six, I've got your back. It doesn't matter what happens, I'm right there by your shoulder. And I like that term you used, broken, because the thing is, when we say broken to ourselves, does that help? Is the question. Um, that's the first thing. The second thing is, when we've got our six, what does that mean? Does that mean we move in with words, or is it a hand on the shoulder? And we bridge the space if people will let us. What does it mean to have somebody six? What does it mean even to have our own six? I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts on that one.
Well, I would like to chime in.
Thanks,
Go
Michelle.
for it.
So my husband and I experienced a ungodly amount of trauma at the end of 2020. Mine led down a path of PTSD and ending my career as a dispatcher. My husband's involved some other stuff not related to the first responder realm or the veteran realm, but did include a natural death and a suicide death within a couple of months of each other. Um, but I watched both of us. We talk very openly about our journey of healing. And it was interesting because him as a man, there's definitely some differences in dealing with trauma with men versus how you deal with it with women. But I had to navigate that with him and learn about some of these, break through these barriers of being my protector because he's the head of our household and he can't appear weak or anything. So we really had to work through that. With him, it was very structured. Like he needed a plan, he needed a passion, and he had to get creative. My husband is now a bladesmith in his spare time, and we have a forge in our backyard. And he
Yeah.
loves it. But alongside him, my path was very different because of the PTSD and everything that comes with that. But what we did find was we both had our versions of walls set up. And a lot of times I didn't want to talk. He didn't want to talk. So don't ask us questions and don't ask us to dig deep. And we were just a mess in our house for a little bit. But we learned, and I don't even know how it came to fruition, but we learned sitting silently with each other did a world of wonders. And so now we have this standing date every Sunday. We get all of our stuff done with the house and we sit out on the driveway. We usually have a beer or two, but we'll start just sitting silently. And by the end of it, I mean, there's been times where literally 5 hours have passed and we're both sunburnt and all of this, but just that silent camaraderie, it would then allow me to say, hey, babe, I'm kind of feeling this way. And the next thing you know, we have this conversation, and sometimes it's just about my stuff, or sometimes just about his, or a combination of both. But we walk away not only with a sense of deeper understanding of our own selves, but also the connection I have with my husband. There's something there that is not easily replicated. And I've been able to find a way to navigate that through the power of our story with our groups that we have on some of the other days and figure out how do we find this common humanity connection that we all have. But it started with us sitting quietly. And I don't know if it was stubbornness at first, like, I'm not going to talk or I'm not going to say the first thing. But once we broke that barrier, it's like now at any point during the week, we'll text each other and say, hey, for Sunday, I don't want to lose this thought. And like, we'll text it and then we follow back up on it on Sunday. And usually there's more to it because now the other person is included in that process to think about it over the week and be ready to hear or maybe provide feedback. So I know that was something that worked for us.
Yeah. I think that's huge. I mean,
Thanks, Michelle.
there is a lot of power in silence. There just is, because I think of, so I'm looking around in my brain because I can think of all the mistakes I made during the grieving process. But the reality is it was my process, and I know at a certain point, my wife, my kids, like my mom, like nobody knew what the hell they could do for me. I didn't know what I could do for me, and I had to go through this process. And you know what? Retiring from law enforcement was probably the single best decision I made, just because I was tired at that point. I had seen enough, done enough. I wasn't even working the streets. I was in a fraud unit. And the numbers worked, so there was no reason for me to force that last 5 years. I retired 4.5 years early, so there was no reason for me. I had achieved every career goal I ever wanted and then some. There was no need for me to keep pushing the square peg into the round hole to bust all the corners off. It was just time, and it still got harder for me. It still got harder because now I had a lot of silent moments with myself and nowhere to put it. So that's one of the things I talk about with people is you have, especially if you're in transition toward retirement, you have to be kind of prepared for the quiet time, and your body's going to create these moments of stress where the community or your bosses used to create. Now I had all this time in the world to create my own new stressors. And I'm finally at a point where I'm learning to be okay in the silence, to include my family in what I'm doing. That's one of the other things I used to talk about was include your family in your healing process. Don't be so stoic that they think everything's okay when you got stuff churning inside. Let them in safely. And I think that's helped my relationship a lot. I got to the point where my boys started checking on me, right? Like, how you doing today, Dad? And they're in their mid-20s having to deal with their dad who's been through all these traumatic events, including workplace trauma. And it just was like, when they started checking on me, I knew that I was on the right path. And now my wife and I, we have a really good relationship. We're we're almost empty nesters, so we're starting to kind of find that we've been together for 30 years, but we're starting to kind of find that newness to our relationship again, which is really nice because to a little bit of my credit, I did the work, and now I know enough to articulate to others what that meant, what that looked like. And it's going to be different for everybody, but I'm a testament that if you do the work, you can be healthier in the long run. And to your point, Barry, you said that something to the effect that the grief is a beautiful song. It's there for us to grow from. And I can say I am a better person today than I am 7 years ago when my brother died, because I got to see the other side of it. I got to see what it meant to lose him to his family, as sad as I saw what it meant for us to lose him, which makes me want to be that better person for the rest of my life so that I leave a decent legacy. So I do like that you said that, Barry, that there is
Yeah.
some good that comes out of it, and it is a beautiful song. It doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt, but you can be a better person from it.
It's like this thing we call transitioning, which is a big topic now for protectors. And in fact, I think life is always about transitioning. I find as I age now and at this stage of my life, there's a shortness to what lies ahead of me, and I feel the grief of that.
Yeah.
So there's something about leaving what we've left. Transitioning is the space between where we were and where we have still to be. And that place has the songs of the past and the uncertainty of the future and the complex layers of the present. And that in I always say, take it all away, and there's grief. You've got grief of your brother. Somebody's got grief of loss of identity and purpose and meaning. Another person's got grief of, I have no tribe. Um, but they're all the stories, and at its core, it's the grief. And what came to me recently was that I um, I feel a calling that forming the tribe as we do on the Power of Our Story is wonderful. These have become the people that live in my heart in the moments in which I may struggle. So I know I'm not alone. But I can feel this hunger for the physical presence of sitting around a fire with other men and women and warriors and protectors and our tribe. And I can feel, even as I talk about it, that it starts to really, it's the tendrils that start to reach into my heart. And there's something about the physical space. So this grief thing is complex because it's, how do we approach each other? What do we need? It layers into, from the hand on the shoulder, somebody saying, phoning up and going, hi, brother. But at the end of the day, I also wonder whether the real work at the end, not even the real work, but part of the journey, maybe when we re-embed back in a tribe and we face each other across the fires and we share our stories and we hold each other and we grieve. Don't know. Ulrika, You've got your hand up. You're muted. You're muted.
Ah.
There you go.
I'm so touched by, first of all, Barry, thank you for this. Really stayed with me. The words themselves are triggering sometimes, and you know, the different forms that we find in each of us. What does listening mean, you know, in that moment? What does offering something mean in that moment, right? That's like for every two or three or whatever group it is to figure out, right? To learn in their specific little bubble. When you say we grieve so many things, I want to just share this teeny tiny story that has shaped my life around grief work. When I lost my grandfather, who I grew up with, I went to this beautiful grief counselor in a group, and she gave this sensational example of in Germany, we have these May trees that we build up on the 1st of May. Like people are dancing around it. It's a huge deal. These are like 200-meter high trees that is really difficult to get them in the center of the village. And sometimes the other villages steal the tree. So it's a huge cultural thing. And her little boy, who was 5 years old, it was the first time he kind of saw this whole spectacle. And you know, when children make an experience that really imprints them, they, depending what their form is, how they express, right? He, for example, he drew a lot of pictures. So for the first like week, right, she had this May tree number 1, number 2, picture number 3, until picture number 12, just the first week. The boy constantly drawing this experience of this tree, right? It continued for another 4 weeks. And she was like, I was about to, you know, just whenever he handed me a piece of paper, just wanted to like put it to and throw it against the wall, because like I have already 200 pictures of this experience. So what she came up with in the end was that we have whatever imprints us so strongly, we have the allowance to draw it as many times as it needs, and to draw it at as many colors as it needs for us to go through it. And maybe it will come back half a year later. I'm still gonna remember this moment that imprinted me, right? This now is a, let's say, a very positive moment. And she kind of took this to the grief process of saying, you are allowed to go and visit that as many times as you need. And the idea that we have to go through it in a certain amount of time very often is a limitation from outside, maybe even from ourselves. And grief goes through so many areas of life, right? So the idea to say, I actually am allowed to have my process with this process. I get to grieve as long as I need to, in whatever form, in whatever waves. And hopefully I have someone across from me who is willing to take this picture and put it on the fridge. And if it's enough, they're going to say, oh my God, I need a break, right? And you're still allowed to draw another picture, right? So that has always been a little reminder for myself when I'm cutting myself short of saying I should be done by this now, you know, I should have found a solution yet. And to say it's going to take the time that it takes, and every step counts, and you do it every single day.
Yeah. You're muted, Barry.
It's what comes to me, Ulrika, is that, you know, we often talk about, I've gone through this, and it means we've gone in and now we've gone out. But do we ever go out? And it's like, you know what I know? I know when we sit together as a tribe, we don't know each other for the stories. We each know each other because at the core of our heartbeat, we feel each other's pain and grief. And that's what awakens us. And do we ever want that to really go? You know, it's so fertile. It's what connects us. It's what makes tribe. It's like when I was running drumming circles. It starts off really random, but somebody will hold the beat, you know, that doom, 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 doom. And slowly the tribe finds something, and then there's one beat, and at that moment we know each other. It's called entrainment. It's the most powerful experience, and it's when we sit as a group, and first, you know, especially with the men, we first bullshitting, we insulting each other, we cracking dirty jokes, and I mean specifically with the veteran boys. But then slowly we change, and suddenly that beat starts to entrain, and the grief starts to be present. And in feeling your grief, I feel my grief, and we feel our grief. And in that point, we are such a beautiful tribe. Now, I don't know if I ever want to go through my grief. I'm learning that I don't like the damn thing at times, because it frankly just, man, it's just leave me alone. You know, like I used to just run. If I could go like furthest, if I could run 80 odd kilometers up a hill, and I would feel the trees and I would feel it move in my body, now I'm good. But I don't know if I want to be good. I want to have this force live within me, but I want it to become more of a fertile force rather than a force that I experience as just bugger off. You know, I want my life back. And I think when we sit in tribe, when we start to recognize that we are who we all are together because we feel the heartbeat of our grief. And then our hearts really begin to heal.
Yeah, I'm convinced that it's just going to be a lifelong process. It's just,
Man, yeah.
yeah, I think we touched on this when we talked a couple weeks ago, is that I have now moments in time where I forget about the sorrow or the death, the multiple deaths. There was a period of time where I got no break from it, and it was constant. So the problem I have, if you want to call it anything, is I'll be happy as a clam, enjoying my time, and I'll just have that random thought come in. Damn, my brother's dead. Shit, I closed his casket. You know, then I get into the expletives. Effort took him so fat, so I can very quickly, very quickly, like switch back to that almost that same, like the day I lost him. And the reality is, it's a lifelong process that I have to create tools to exist with. I have to learn to exist with this, but still be present with others, because I probably have a blank spot for about 3 years of my life where I just was, maybe 4, where I was just I was functioning, I was working, I was earning an income, I was still going from point A to B, but my entire being was altered. And now I feel like I've kind of come back for full circle. And you said it very poignantly, Barry, is bug off. I want my life back. And here I am. I'm living my life now. Now I'm living my life with these little interruptions of grief. Whereas before, I know without a doubt, I was grieving and trying to live my life. It's completely flipped now. I am living my life, but I accept that I have moments that I will have to allow myself to grieve. And I think that alone is that whole tragedy to triumph part of it. That is where you can say, damn, I'm living my life again, and that feels good. It doesn't mean that I don't hurt. It just means that I have 51% more strength of living than not dying, than grieving, right? Than living in that grief. And if you want to live in that grief, you might as well be dead. That's kind of, you're just wasting so much time, and it feels good to have my life back in some ways. But just recognizing that grief will potentially reinsert itself at some point. And I won't, and it's not by invitation, it just happens. And that part of it is, I think, probably the most frustrating part of all of it. And that's what I was talking about earlier, that I still have my days where I just want to disappear into obscurity, and I question why I'm trying to do so much, and I just take a day off, you know, and so it's just going to be a lifelong process. I
I think it
appreciate this
is, James.
opportunity
And
for sure.
I know we're drawing, time's getting a bit short, but I want to say that, you know, what I've learned was I often feel the first 60 years of my life, which is a long portion, I was simply running. And I meant literally, you know, give me a marathon, give me a couple of ultra marathons, one immigration after another, I was running. But when I began to understand, and I think I'm slowly kind of getting there, I realized grief that's with it's it's the most powerful presence inside me. And when I stop listening to it, I become an irritable bugger. I'm tight. I
Mhm.
can feel my teeth are sharp. Um, but when I listen to that song, and I'm still so much a work in progress around learning to listen to that song and making it a fertile place within me, I'm more at ease, I'm more at peace. It's almost like a contradiction in terms that the more we listen to this beautiful song of our grief, it's not there to hurt us, it's not there to freeze us. And this is the process, I think, till the day we die. I mean, I'm at a stage in my life now where I can't run anymore because I used running to run away from my grief. And eventually, you know, I ran my body into the ground. I'm in grief around, I wish I had more time. I see the finishing line in front of me. Um, I'm in grief around the aging. You know, I get up slower off the ground, but I'm not who I was 20 years ago. But these are the fertile opportunities to become, to flow more into the point at which I breathe my last breath. And it's not easy. You know, I'm a psychologist and I struggle. I struggle. And in understanding that I do struggle, I hear the struggles of the people that I sit with. Um, and I suspect that, and I probably think struggle is not the right word. I'm still learning to dance with this powerful force inside me. And I suspect that I will do so till I breathe my last breath. But when I do breathe my last breath, I hope that the tribes I've been in and the journey I've made and having people that love me and that I love deeply, that I will be able to release my body with joy rather than with loss. So I think, James, and that's, I guess, what I loved about you, brother, is that when we first talked, it was the grief that I felt so powerfully with you. And that part was where I felt your heart and the extraordinary part of who you were. And that's, I guess, what prompted me to reach out to you for this conversation, not for the story of the past, not for lessons, you know, cognitive lessons, but the fact because you represent such a presence that I know opened my heart.
Appreciate that.
I
Yeah.
really want to
Me-
thank you for that and to thank you for bringing that today.
I appreciate it. Hopefully it was meaningful, and I know we all have a
Uh,
story. It's I just feel really good that I can get through this type of talk now without losing my wits about me, because it was such a raw, just a raw pain, like physiological pain that I felt for so many years, that to know, I know that these discussions have helped people. I know that the work we've done through my nonprofit has helped people. I know that the writings that we've done and I've participated in, that they've helped people. So I feel really good to have turned something horrifically awful into something that's pretty good, that's helping people. And if we just save one, which I know we have, we're doing our job, because that means that there's one less family out there that is having to bury a loved one, you know. And I say this from that suicide loss standpoint. Unfortunately, we'll still have more to grieve, I think, in life. But my hope is I get a long stretch here that I don't, and keep moving forward positively. So I appreciate y'all for this opportunity to talk with you.
and James, I know I'd like everyone, I'll check in with everyone as well, but I want to say that there's another part of you, brother. And that is the part that resonated so powerfully with me. And that is where I think you will bring so much healing to people you sit with, is the way in which the song and the resonance of your grief lives within you. It lives within your eyes, and it lives within your face, and it lives within your presence. And I believe that that is the part that touches us so deeply. And that is the part that the words rest on. And when we don't have that, we become, like Shauna Springer says, we become technicians of the soul rather than carriers and holders of the soul.
Right.
So, brother, you know, I mean, I love you. And I know that just that moment in where we talked many weeks ago, I came away and I felt you. And in feeling you, I felt me. So
Appreciate that.
that is the most powerful thing you will bring to the people you sit with, informed by that program. That program is the song that's come from the grief that you hold and that lives so powerfully inside you.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that.
Michelle, Ulrika, comments, finishing, anything to say, complete?
Michelle, you want to go first?
Michelle?
James, I just want to say thank you. I think this was a great conversation. I definitely took notes as I normally do with these types of calls, and I'm left sitting with a lot of things to chew on. There we go, Eureka, yes. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing more about your journey. What I love is that I got to listen to you the first time you were on The Power of Our Story, and the
Yeah.
growth that you show just between that call and this call is it's powerful. And I want you to know that I notice that, and it gives hope for people such as myself who are still finding their way and figuring out the journey.
I appreciate that. Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Um, I'm I'm having continuously the sentence in my head that says befriend the grief, befriend the grief, befriend the grief. Um, I always feel like these parts of us like grief, they kind of knock on the door, right? Or maybe sometimes they don't knock, they're just really obnoxious standing outside. They have not been invited, you know. And and then I wonder what happens if you don't let them in, you know? So the idea for me is always, how would you feel as this part that has not been felt, that has not been seen, being having the door closed for you, right? This has always been a powerful picture for my own grief, in the sense of, if I don't invite these parts of me to at least come in, you know, like this, let's say, uncomfortable guest, right? You don't really know where to put them on the table. You know, you don't know how to make conversation with them. But if you don't let them in, that's going to be very disturbing for all of you, right? For all parts of you. So
Yeah.
I imagine somewhere there is a journey of, there's a part of you that wants to be integrated, that wants to sit at your table with you, right?
Yeah.
And you get to decide which part on the table, right? And sometimes when you say, James, sometimes I'm sitting at the table with all these other beautiful parts in my life. Everything is very lively and fun. And then this part just kind of comes rushing in and sits at the head of the table, right? Takes the entire conversation. And I think that is just a way of like figuring it out, of saying, okay, now, okay, you might want to move a little bit up here, you know,
Yeah.
but I think the idea of inviting this part, befriending this part, to invite it into your home and to invite it on your table, has been a huge, important part for me to recognize this, to say, if I don't open the door
Yeah.
for this important part that is knocking, apparently, you know. So,
Yeah. That's a
and
good point. That's a really good point. I think it's to your point earlier, not to cut you off, but to your point earlier is like, if that grief is an uncomfortable guest, maybe it would be good to sit and listen to that grief for a while and maybe find out where it's coming from, right? From that perspective, that might change you Might be uncomfortable to listen to, but it might change for you. Yeah, that's a good point. Embrace it.
And most of the time, right, if we look at this unwanted guest, the moment they get to have a little bit of moment where they get listened to, most of the time something shifts, right? That's at least
Yeah,
the experience we all make, I feel.
Well, you know,
yeah,
what that links into is our guy behind and going, and then I ask, so how come have you left yourself behind? And maybe that part we leave behind, Ulrika, is the part that's knocking on the door. So I just want to say, James, I had this beautiful feeling that your presence was going to be a door for the most powerful, wonderful conversation that I hope those who listen to it will find a journey into healing as well. And I really want to thank you for your presence today and also for just making time to come and have this conversation. So thank you. And I think we'll
thank you.
kick off. We'll be back again in another 4 weeks. Scott won't be back, but we're having my best friend and buddy, Chappie, who is just a beautiful man. Beautiful, 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 and great wisdom. And I'm looking forward to a conversation with him and spreading the ripples of all the things we carry and that as men we often try to kick under the mat. So thank you for today. Michelle, if you want to stop the recording, then we can just have a quick debrief as well, which will be good. But thanks to everybody who's listening to this and who will take time to hear your story, James, and be moved deeply as I was today.